It was a noisy, frightening night, but I was weary, and before long my eyes grew heavy, and I was soon asleep. Several times I woke up, hoping it was a dream. But when I saw the men around the campfire and raised my hands to wipe my eyes, the chains were a reminder that it was all too real, and I just sat there and cried until I fell back asleep. At first light, I was awakened and dragged from a dream where I was free and planting seeds with my sisters in our mother's garden. Rain had just begun to fall, and we were so happy and smiling as we danced together in the puddles forming on the ground at our feet. But the rain and my family quickly faded away as the heavy chains binding my wrists were being pulled at by a man with hair the color of blood. He was a large man, covered in some type of animal skin the likes of which I had never seen before, and he did not look happy as he stared at me. He yanked me to my feet and began yelling loudly at me as he began marching toward the others already well on the trail, almost dragging me as I stumbled a chain's length behind him. I soon found myself limping and shouted to him that I had a thorn in my foot, but he wouldn't even look at me and only pulled harder on the chains as he continued his pace. I limped along as best as I could until I could almost not feel the pain over the anger I was feeling toward that man and his kind. In no time at all, we were caught up to the others, but I did not see my father with them. "Where is he, Bloodhair?" I screamed. "Where's my father? The man who is with me. What have you done to him? Where is my father?" Neither he nor anyone else seemed to hear or understand my words, for they kept advancing on the trail. So I let my legs go limp and fell to the ground so that Bloodhair had to drag me. He looked back at me in disgust and pulled harder on the chains to try and raise me, but I would not stand. So he dragged me a little way farther until it was finally too difficult for him to tolerate. He screamed something at me as he pulled the long blade at his side from its skin. I was very frightened and expected to be killed by him when he raised it toward me, when suddenly another man came running back to us, frantically yelling something at him. Bloodhair stood fast with his nose flaring as he breathed deep and hard with an anger in his eyes like I'd never seen a man have before. Then they stared one another down like animals do when neither of them wants to fight, but both want to win. It was clear that there was trouble between them, and I wished they would have killed each other. "Where's my father, you white devils?" I demanded. It was then that they both looked at me and cursed aloud with one voice. They didn't care about me or what I had to say about anything. I wondered in my despair where my gods were. Where had they gone during our greatest hour of need? Bloodhair threw down the chains he was holding and stormed past the other man, who picked them up and gave them a hard tug, raising me to my feet, and once more we were on our way through the woods. I took the moment when they were staring each other down to pull the thorn from my foot so that walking was much easier. Up ahead, in the distance, I spotted a clearing where there were several of the men already resting from the long walk, and to my joy among them, I spied my father sitting with his back against a tree. While a part of me hoped that he'd escaped our captors, seeing him there let me know that at least he was still alive, and I felt sorrow and gladness all at one time. When father turned to look for me, I could see the glistening of blood as it trickled down the side of his head, and it was clear that they had beaten him again. A lump quickly formed in my throat, and it was hard to swallow as I fought back my tears. He smiled at me as best as he could when he spotted me, and I waved at him without letting them see me do so. We were both so helpless and alone in that group of people. The noise of breaking branches and men talking caught everyone's attention as another group of men began to approach us from a different direction, bringing conversations in our camp to a halt. The white devils began whispering to themselves as they watched the men coming toward us. Once they were close enough, I could see a group of shackled men being led in chains by 2 African tribesmen. They were escorting about 20 other black men into our camp, men who were bound in irons just as we were. From the markings on the men's spears and the way they were dressed, with a straw band wrapped around their ankles and tattoos covering one arm and half of their faces. I recognized them as Windabi. It was not uncommon in Africa for one tribe to conquer another in battle, and they would then take captives for themselves of the survivors. Above all other tribes, the Windabi were noted for this, as well as for kidnapping women and children who were washing down at the river. But that was the first that I knew of, that they were selling captives to people who were not like us. In truth, as I know it now, many Africans who were kidnapped for the slave trade were taken and sold to the white men by other Africans. To such men, it was no different than trading away their cattle or grain. If my father had known that the Windabi were capable of such things, he would have warned me of it, because we didn't live far away from those evil people. And while they were greatly feared as a warrior tribe, they were a lazy people who would rather steal their food than grow it or hunt for it. My father called them the two-legged hyenas, scavengers who always looked for ways to take advantage of someone else. Once they arrived in the clearing, the Windabi joined those who captured us, and the two warriors were each handed a small sack with something inside. I watched as they peered inside the sacks, smiling as they pulled several bracelets from them, each made with brightly colored gold coins hanging loosely from them. With glee, they put them around their wrists, holding them up to see the sunlight dance off the coins. I'd seen such bracelets before. They called them manillas, and they were worn as jewelry, but they were also used for trade, removing a coin or two from the bracelet whenever they were needed to buy something. The crafty Africans bowed their heads and smiled at the white men when they turned to leave down the path they'd just come from. I remember how they were both laughing and smiling as they walked away, but it was a short-lived happiness. Before they had walked very far, I heard the noise from one of the long guns crack the air open like thunder as a thick cloud of smoke suddenly filled the air in the clearing. The normally screeching animals in the jungle stopped at once from making their noises as they listened to the frightening sound, and I dropped to the jungle floor out of fear, having never heard the sound of a rifle before. I looked at the white men facing the Windabi, just as one of the Africans fell face first into the ground. Leaves flew into the air with the smoke, as his body thrashed back and forth for a moment on the ground before becoming calmingly still. The Windabi, who was still standing, raised his spear to the white men as if ready to respond, but before he could throw it at them, another shot from the rifle was fired over his head, and he immediately tossed away the spear and fell to his knees beside the body of his friend. I watched as the once fierce warrior cowered to the white men like a frightened woman, with his hands raised high in the air above him as he looked face down at the dirt. A few of the white men approached him and removed the gold bracelets from his hands, replacing them with rusted steel shackles like they'd put on us. Then they went over and kicked the body of the man who was lying in a pile of bloody leaves on the jungle floor, and when he didn't move, they removed the manillas from his lifeless wrists. One of the white men yelled at another. I don't think he meant to kill him, but only to scare him so they could also take him prisoner. I almost hate to say that I enjoyed such a tragedy, but back in that jungle, I must confess to you that I was glad to see the Windabi meet the same fate they were sending other men to. One of the men tossed the sack that the Windabi was holding down to the ground on the side of the trail. As I passed it by, I saw the few colorful beads that had fallen from it, which were of so little value to the white men that they left them lying there in the dirt to be swallowed up by the jungle.